Welcome back at WNST, Dallas and Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are positively doing another pandemic piece. No masks, and we're doing it completely socially distanced. But Don Moeller, I really wish we were doing it over some chicken and waffles on a sunny day, the red, white, and blue after a Catonsville parade and all that. But we'll get back to that soon. I know El Guapo's open across the street over there in Frederick Road. My wife and I took in a little poutine out at State Fair this week. We want to get everybody back to State Fair, everybody staying socially distanced, as I have been doing out there, as well as at El Guapo. Our friends at Fadley's delivering crab cakes all over the world. Got to tell you about those crab cakes. We had an episode of Baltimore Positive last week I want everybody to check out before the 4th of July from Damie Hahn and our friend Jack Brooks over on the Eastern Shore, talking about where those crab cakes come from, President Trump and visas and immigrants and all sorts of things that we learn here at Baltimore Positive. But all you need to know is they're one click away, those delicious crab cakes. Go to Fadley's Restaurant and Fadley's.com and do that. Don, I want to give you the pleasure talking about Taharka ice cream because I've been too busy eating it to talk about it.
Well, I tell people all of the time, I really did think you were exaggerating when you said it's going to be the best ice cream that you've ever had. I like ice cream. But I thought, best ice cream? Oh, okay. Well, it truly is, and I've recommended it to several people since, and they have the same reaction I did.
Well, it's made in Baltimore, so it has love. It adds
absolutely
je ne sais quoi, as your wife may say, Linda. Let's talk about your boy, Jeff, as well, and selling homes at this point, because we're hearing more and more homes are closing, right? I mean, the housing market has not been where the pandemic has been, right?
Well, it seems as if every time he lists a house, I'll say to him, I'll look at the video that comes online and go, well, that one probably won't last a week or two, and he'll text me back and goes, Dad had 3 offers in a day. I mean, the market's hot. They're buying and selling all kinds of homes. So give Jeff a call, 410-746-1547. We thank all of our friends at Central Maryland, and we always ask folks, I mean, particularly during a pandemic, they're continuing to do great work. But go out and check our friends at Thread and thread.org. And if you're looking for some philanthropic activity, it's hard to think of anything better than Thread. So, Nestor, that sort of wraps that up. Really excited about our guest today, delegate from the 40. Your district, Nestor. You're a delegate. You're a representative.
I get the little bubble I get to fill in, every couple of years, right?
Right.
Brooke, welcome to Baltimore Positive.
Thank you so much for having me. When a constituent calls, I have to say yes. So.
Oh, see that? See that? Now, we're already doing politics here. Now I'm on with 2 politicians. Now we got problems, Well, as you may or may not know, Don was my high school guidance counselor, and we spent a lifetime going to Ravens games and being friends and being radio mates, and we put this Baltimore Positive thing together. I don't know that we had pandemic sort of on the dance card, and I don't know that you had that on the dance card when you're running for House of Delegates here in 46. Nope. Just give me a little briefer on where we are here in the summer as it heats up, and we've had a couple of bars. I was over at Verde having a pizza on Monday. On Tuesday, I was at the Chaucer. My wife and I walked through the city. We particularly like these 94-degree steamy days because we get a little workout in as we get our pizza around town. It's still here. The virus is here, and we've had issues right here in your own constituency where gloves and a mask are significant. Right? That's rule 1.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what we've seen certainly in Baltimore City and in my district, we've worked with, first and foremost, we have to make sure that we remember that restarting the economy and having a strong economy and also dealing with the public health crisis that we're facing is one issue, right? People won't, if they don't feel safe, if they aren't safe when they go out, then the economy will, again, have to be closed. And so we have to make sure that we remember that solving this public health crisis and dealing with it is also helping the economy. And too often, I think our federal leader doesn't understand that, which is unfortunate. It's been great to see some businesses be able to reopen. It's been wonderful to see, even when they weren't reopened, people, trying to order toys online from Amuse Toys, order pizza from Verde or Hershey's, or, trying to make sure that we're keeping the small businesses that we love in Baltimore alive and thriving. And now, of course, there's more and more options for outdoor eating, as long as the weather cooperates.
Well, Baltimore's
So we're
got so
seeing that
many
over.
great things, right? And,
Yep.
and Don, you know I talk about it. And even though I drove out to the 21228 the other night to get poutine, all right, because Clark's was closed, and we weren't going to head over to Fells Point at 9:00 on the other night. But we love Baltimore, Brooke, and we walk through
Yep.
the city every day, every night, all the time. Certainly the last 5 months. I mean, other than a little trip down to North Carolina where nobody was wearing a mask and it kind of scared the hell out of us, we came home. This is our neighborhood. We've been in our car very little. We've been, out
Yep.
to Hunt Valley once or twice, up to my radio station. I've been in Hartford County maybe twice during this whole time. The neighborhood becomes everything to you. And walking the waterfront and walking up Charles Street and walking up to get Indian food and walking through the neighborhoods. I'm in love with Baltimore all over again, and I'm one of those guys that says, I want to be here when it all comes back to life and when the grass starts to grow again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been, we love living here. My family and I live in Southeast Baltimore, and we love it. And we send our kids to an awesome public school that we love. We have great friends all over the city and the region and the state, of course. But, we feel really dedicated to Baltimore City, and we know that, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the city, but we have, but there's so many things to love about it as well. And certainly we've worked hard to, make sure we're doing what we can to support our small businesses during this challenging time. Yeah. So, but there's great things.
One of the things that I noticed that you've done, and it's so difficult to stay connected with constituents during these past 3, 4, 5 months, is that you really made an effort to connect online, and you're doing these online forums. Tell our listeners a little bit about the online forums, what you're doing, and what you're learning from them.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So when we first got back from the General Assembly session in March, which was, of course, the second time in history that we adjourned early since the Civil War, immediately I started working really at a hyper-local level to talk to our community groups and others about their needs. Food was number one, but others just felt disconnected and like they needed information. And I was getting the same questions over and over. What's the federal bill that's being passed? Can you tell me what it does? Where can I find information about applying for food stamps? What's going to happen to transit? What should I do? What's the future of education look like? Can we talk about it? And I was getting lots of questions, and I realized that one of the things that, I think that there's a lot more to being an elected official than just passing legislation, right? Part of our job is to connect with our communities, make sure they have information that they need, and be a resource. And I realized one way that I could be a resource and be helpful and reach out to people is to share information that I was able to glean from experts. And so I started putting together webinars, and we save them on YouTube so people can always go back and see them, on applying for benefits, connecting with, our Attorney General on scams, hearing from teachers and transit drivers and frontline workers about what was going on, hearing from people about how to support businesses, all different topics. And people now send me their ideas for topics, which is great. But we've had, I've had well over, I think we're up to almost 1,500 unique people sign up for these over the past couple months. And that's just the people who actually register. It doesn't include the people who are watching on Facebook Live or on YouTube. So it's been, I get a lot of positive feedback, and that's why I keep doing it, because I want to make sure that I'm providing the service and providing information to people who might not have access to it otherwise. So yeah, it's been great. I have all my briefings listed on my website, brookelierman.com/briefings, and people are always welcome to send me their thoughts on who they'd like to hear from as well.
Well, I as Nestor knows, one of my pet peeves is when people want to paint all elected officials with a broad brush and think they're all self-serving, and when it's just not true, and there are folks out like you out there trying to really get down to the nitty-gritty and make a difference for the people in your community. So I applaud you for doing that. And while you're doing that, Brooke, what's it like? What are you hearing from people as you walk the street and talk to your constituents? What's going on in their mind in the midst of this madness?
That's a great question. And, sometimes it feels like it changes daily, but, there's a lot of anxiety, right? People are very concerned not only about their health, but about their rent, or if they're a small landlord, about their renter's ability to pay rent, or about their job and, whether it's going to be there or not. Of course, we've dealt with hundreds and hundreds of people just in our district who haven't been able to get their unemployment benefits in a timely way. So that's been challenging. But when I first came back, people were just worried about food. How are we going to feed ourselves if we don't have an income? District 46 is an awesome district. I love it, and I'm so proud to represent it. We also have the highest number of Latino immigrants in the city in our district. And
I'm the son of one of them, by the way. So
are you? That's great. Yeah. And unfortunately, we've seen, they cannot access federal benefits. They didn't get their check. And many of them have been out of work. And now what we're seeing is many of them went to work, got sick, and Hopkins just reported a 41% positivity rate of Latinos who are being tested for COVID. It's off the chart.
Oh, my God.
It's incredible. And so, it's terrifying. And so, there's just still so much, even as we see.
Well, repeat, actually,
that stops
it's so
me.
Terrifying, Brooke. It's so terrifying when I ask you to hit rewind and share that stat with our listeners again, because I don't want them to be reaching down for a coffee in their car and miss that. That was a mind-blowing statistic.
Yes. So of Latinos who are being tested, 42% of those of Hopkins patients who are Latino are testing positive for COVID. And to put that in perspective, that's just, it's eons more than any other category. It's 42.6% of Latino patients, 8.8% of white patients, and 17.6% of Black patients. So there's just huge disparities in who is getting sick in Maryland. And so even though, the governor and others, we can applaud sort of the downward trend of positivity in Maryland, we know that it is very adversely affecting members of our community and members in Baltimore too. And so we are not out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination. 21224 Southeast Baltimore is the hot spot in the city. So we have a long ways left to do. We have a lot of work left to do.
That's my homeland. Brooke Lierman here from the 46th and representing us in the House of Delegates. I wanted to ask you more about the housing, because that feels to be the acute thing, and it's the thing we see on the news, and it's the thing that people are worried about. And as a business owner, it was PPP a couple of months ago. Now We're getting up on rent being due, and I know Jack was out on front of that. We're in this sort of transitional, weird political phase this summer, trying to wait for Brandon in the next election. But for people who are on that struggle right now, what's the reality, the options? What kind of phone calls and emails are you getting, Brooke?
People are very worried about having to pay rent, and it's this huge cycle. And so if somebody can't pay rent and they have a small landlord, and that landlord is depending on that rent to pay their mortgage, and then they can't pay that mortgage and the bank forecloses on them, then everybody's SOL, right? So what we've seen, I'm on the Environment and Transportation Committee, and we had a 5-hour hearing last week on housing and the housing crisis. Every single group who came to testify, landlord groups, builders, tenants' rights organizations, social justice groups, legal aid, every single group sort of hammered away, we need more rental support from the government. And I really applaud Baltimore City. They are putting in an incredibly robust amount of money towards rental support, and there's a program right now that people can apply for. But the state just hasn't come forward in the way that it needs to come forward. And so we are continuing to call for the state to create a much more robust and better funded rental support program so we can prop up housing. The last thing we want is an eviction crisis where we are suddenly, landlords are losing homes and renters are being evicted and forced into homelessness. I can't imagine anything worse, frankly. It's a huge public health crisis in addition to a housing crisis then. So we definitely need to keep pushing for more rental support. But I'm glad to see that Baltimore City and other local jurisdictions have stepped up, Baltimore County as well, of course, to do rental support, which is so important.
Well, Brooke, I was so glad to hear you mention, I don't own any rental properties, but I have some friends who do have, and not many, they don't have 30, 40 houses, but I have some friends who along the way bought a house here and a house there. And I think sometimes in this discussion, we lose sight of the small landlord who has a mortgage to pay, which is based upon the rent that they're trying to be good landlords and take care of their property. and provide good housing for folks. Yet, if their renter can't pay the rent, then they can't meet their mortgage either. Sometimes they get lost in the shuffle, right?
Right. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that's totally true, and that's a lot of landlords. And there's a crisis then if a few small landlords lose their homes, and big, Jared Kushner type companies buy them up. That's not great for the city, right? That's not good for any community. And so we want to make sure that we can support renters who end up then supporting the entire system. And we also got to make sure that the money that taxpayer dollars that are going to these rental support programs is being used wisely. We don't want to give money to a landlord in the form of rental support and then have that landlord turn around and say, well, you know what, you were $50 short, so I'm going to evict this guy anyway.
Right.
Like that cannot happen, right? That should not be allowed. And so Baltimore City and the county are doing good things in making sure there are restrictions around some of this funding. The state has not. And so we need to see sort of more robust measures around from the state money as well. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Well, we also forget just how predatory
Go ahead,
it can be, right, in this sort of an environment with have and have not, right?
Sorry, say that again. You were
we forget how predatory it can be if left to open resources and vices in an era where there haves and have-nots. Brooke Lierman's here, Maryland House of Delegates. She's in the 46th. It is mine. I want to ask you, as a person with your background, I mean, you're everything but a lifer politician. We're going to have Bill Ferguson on, who comes from the background of teaching, and obviously Don Moeller, a former Baltimore County executive and principal and my high school guidance counselor and all that. So much background and education. And why here and now? Why did you get involved in this? I ask every aspiring politician who isn't a lifer politician, how did you decide to do this and create a family and a life around this? And certainly with a background at Dartmouth and Austin, Texas, you didn't have to settle in East Baltimore, right?
Right. No, we, I like to say I'm not from Baltimore, but I got here as fast as I could. I went to high school in Montgomery County and went off. I did after college, did AmeriCorps Vista and worked on a number of campaigns, went to law school. And then I was able to get a federal clerkship in Baltimore. And so I was able, and I only applied for federal clerkships in Baltimore. I wanted to move here, and I was really fortunate to be able to receive one.
Hold on, I'm not going to let you just don't go over that. You say, I wanted to. Why did you want to move here? What was the why?
Well, I grew up a big Orioles fan. I mean, what's not to love? No, Baltimore just appealed to me. I did not want to move to Washington, D.C., right? I wanted to move someplace where I would have representation, where I wanted to be in Maryland, and I wanted to be in a city. I wanted to be in a place where I could walk to my grocery store, where I could walk to restaurants, where I would have parks to hang out in, and, I wanted to be able to use public transit and send my kid to public schools and be in a place where I felt like I could be involved. And Baltimore, I didn't know Baltimore, perhaps as well as I should have, but it appealed to me, and there was something about it that I thought, I think that's the place that I want to go. And I dragged my husband here. I don't think he'd ever been here before. And I sort of said, well, I'm moving to Baltimore, so if you want to get married, you want to move there too?
Well, that was commitment. That spells commitment.
I love the leadership that's being shown.
He was a very good sport about it. And, I'm lucky he's found a great job. He's very happy.
It's funny you'd say about the parks and stuff. I've lived here my whole life, and my wife and I held hands and walked to the park about a month ago and realized there's a pond in Patterson Park that I had never been to. So, and my wife's like, we've been married 17 years. You never take me to the pond? We thought we had to go to Central Park for that. And I'm like, all right, man, we're going to continue to explore our own city here.
No, it's great.
The Orioles thing, you're really trying to win Uncle Don's heart here. You know that, right?
Hey, well, my father took me out of school. I was in 7th or 8th grade to attend the very first game at Camden Yards. So
there you go.
I have that memory.
Now, Brooke, you want to know a full story? That was the first 6 months on the radio for me. Don Moeller and I spent that day on the rooftop on the deck of the Holiday Inn. It was the Bird's Nestor Cafe, and we broadcast in the open air. That's where we were that day. So we all mark our time by the Paul Sorrento home run that day, right?
That's very cool. Oh, fun. Yeah. No, I mean, when I moved here, I we bought a home in Fells Point, where we still live in Fells Point, and I got involved in the community association. I was fortunate to get a job at a great law firm, Brown Goldstein and Levy, and I started doing volunteer work. And honestly, sort of things kept coming up that frustrated me. Like I went to take the bus, and it didn't come, and I was like, "Why is the bus system here so bad?" And I realized it was run by MTA, a state agency, and we started looking at schools, and the school said, you can't drink the water at the water fountains because there's lead in the water. And I was like, is this for real? Like, this is the 21st century. This is the richest state in the country. There were just things. I was representing neighborhood groups in front of the liquor board and having no success, even though we had the law and the facts on our side, and realized all the law was state law. And there were things like that happened over and over. And I realized what an outsized role the state and state laws and state administration plays in Baltimore neighborhoods and in the success of Baltimore. And I thought, you know what? Like, we can do better. Like, this isn't right.
Well, I always say Uncle Larry, Uncle Larry doesn't think enough about Baltimore. So that's...
No. Yeah.
No, he don't. Well, when Brooke's talking, when you're talking there, I'm thinking my head is beginning to spin because you mentioned the whole liquor board thing. And I always tell folks, if you want to see a convoluted piece of state legislation, just one day when you're bored, pull up Article 2B and try to make sense of the state's liquor laws. And
crazy.
I defy anyone to try to make sense of Article 2B of the Maryland State
I got a friend
laws.
in your district just trying to get like a guitar player to hang out and play some jazz music at brunch on a Sunday, and can't get it done. Can't get it done.
I mean, it's the Article 2B is a mess in many different ways. We could do a whole show about Article 2B.
Without a doubt. Brooke, there are so, we said when you were coming on, there are so many things taking place right now, locally, nationally. Let's start, though, with the most burning issue. We've had a recent city election. We're going to have a new young mayor. We'll get you to talk about that. But you never can talk about Baltimore City and all the great things that are there without talking about, though, the elephant in the room, which is crime. And as someone who lives in the city and wants your folks to be able to walk down and get a snowball or walk to that pond that Nestor is talking about, give me your take on crime in the city, the job the commissioner's doing, the relationship between the police and state's attorney, and what we need to do better to get this thing right.
Sure. I think of crime and how I think about creating a safe city, right? And to me, there's three elements of that. There's the long term, which we have utterly failed to invest in, right? Great transit that gets people to work so they can get to high paying jobs and they don't, they have options. Our schools, recreation facilities, so things that we know deter long-term crime, build and create opportunity, right? Investing in those, number one, far and away. Number two is sort of more short-term and immediate safety issues. And that, to me, is violence prevention and intervention, public health-oriented, evidence-based practices. So that is Safe Streets. It's ROCA. It could even be considered programs like THREAD, frankly, where
you just said the magic word.
I know, you love THREAD. It's a great organization. But, there are organizations that are doing the work of long-term prevention and short-term and immediate prevention and helping people to diffuse tense situations. That's Safe Streets. It's ROCA, which is, cognitive behavioral therapy. And I know you guys had Thomas Abt on your show a few weeks ago. I'm a huge believer. I mean, we have to really be doubling down on those types of public health-oriented, evidence-based violence prevention initiatives. And then third is police. And that is an after the fact, often, investigatory work and making sure that we're actually doing investigations and catching the people who do these heinous crimes. We have an incredibly low success rate and conviction rate right now. And that's a huge problem because it makes people lose faith in the police. People don't want to talk. I really appreciate Commissioner Harrison because he understands that, it's not all about police. Police cannot create a safe city. And, I think that's what a lot of people were talking about, defunding police. understand, and we all need to understand, is that we cannot police ourselves to a safe city and an equitable city. And so we have to invest in the other two areas as well. And we're not doing enough of that. In last week at the BPW, so 2 years ago in 2018, I championed and we passed a bill at the state level, creating the first state level funding for violence prevention and intervention programs like Safe Streets. It's called the VIP bill. It's the Violence Intervention and Prevention Program. Last week at the BPW, Hogan initiated and they cut funding for it. I mean, they also cut funding for Baltimore police, but they cut funding for Safe Streets. And, that just can't be acceptable, right? We have to be investing more in that.
For the symphony.
They did. They cut funding for so many things in Baltimore.
And it was crazy. I look and I'm saying, are we committed to the city or not? It just seems, well, as you talk, you lead us right in then to the next topic, which is all connected to, I think, safe cities and, as you said, crime reduction. You put it number one. You've been one of the major advocates of one of our passions, which is Kirwan. We've been on the Kirwan train from the beginning, and I'm not particularly optimistic, and I want you to make me more optimistic.
Well, I will say I am optimistic about the House. I will leave Senator Ferguson to talk about the Senate, but
we will ask him shortly.
We are big believers in the House. The Speaker is, she is totally committed. She's fantastic. She's done a great job at making sure everybody understands the importance of the blueprint and Kirwan legislation. We have many parents of young children and school-age kids around the state of Maryland in the General Assembly and in the House of Delegates, and we all get it. Like, we see it firsthand, right? Like, we know what needs to be done, and so I think everybody in the Maryland, in the House of Delegates, and I know, many senators, of course, as well, really understand that we cannot think short term right now, right? If anything, if this pandemic has done anything, I believe that it has crystallized the pre-existing inequities that exist in our system. And if we are going to move forward, we cannot think short term. We have to really dig deep and invest for long-term success. And number one exhibit for that is Kirwan. We have to do it, or we will be, really failing our children and our grandchildren. So it's a must do.
The old Saturday morning cartoon version then of how help our listeners understand what are the next steps for, because I think the common thinking is now on the part of people, and folks have written, that Kirwan will be a fatality of the lost revenue resulting from the pandemic. So educate our listeners of what needs to happen to save Kirwan so they can have a voice and weigh in.
It's a great question. The first thing I'm going to do is say, follow Strong Schools Maryland. So StrongSchoolsMaryland.org.
We've had David Hornbeck on.
Yep. So follow them, because they will send you emails and Facebook posts and tweets about everything that's going on. Get in touch with your legislators. So the governor vetoed the bill, and when we go back into session, we will need to override the governor's veto.
All of this was expected, by the way, right? I mean, we've been talking about this for a year, right?
I mean, it was not. I will say,
I'm just blown away that Larry Hogan wants to be the anti-education governor.
I know.
It blows me away.
I mean, even in Texas.
And that's probably why he doesn't come on the show, because he doesn't want me to tell him.
I mean, even in Texas, they passed an education funding bill 2 years ago. Texas, like a huge education funding bill. So this is not something that is this partisan in other states, right? This is happening. Other states have passed huge funding increases in education around the country because they know that we are competing in a global economy now, and we have to step up.
Who thinks we're doing enough educating our children in this? I mean, I can't think of anyone who thinks we can't do more or we shouldn't do more, that we need to do more, quite frankly.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. I mean, everybody that I talk to and the parents that I speak to, and, it's been so important. And, I will say, even some Republican state senators who, we had several of them vote for it. I think Senator Addie Eckhart said something like it was the most inclusive process she'd participated in and in crafting the blueprints, and they voted for the bill. So this was not in the Senate a partisan issue, and it's unfortunate that Governor Hogan, it's just unfortunate he doesn't understand that.
Okay, so Brooke, let's continue down this road for a moment or two. So, senators who were on the fence and came down to cast a yes vote, or even House members who cast a yes vote for Kirwan, now, in a sense, get a chance to rethink that vote and vote no because they simply say, well, I would have voted for it, but given the revenue projections coming out of the Comptroller's office, we no longer can do that because Maryland cannot afford it. Delegate Brooke Lierman asked to be recognized. She stands on the House floor, and she responds to that member by saying what?
The situation in our schools has not changed. Nothing has improved in our schools since the pandemic came to Maryland. In fact, our schools need us more now more than ever, right? There are huge digital divides among our students. Our teachers are working extra hours to try to meet the needs. We need to attract a talented workforce. We need to make sure that our schools have the resources they need to to prepare our students for a new economy that's being shaped by the pandemic, but also by a global workforce. And if we fail our children now, if we miss this opportunity, then decades from now we will still be paying for it. And it will cost much more than it will cost us today to fund this program. So
the governor says to you, fine, delegate, tell me where you're going to find the money.
Well, we passed a number of revenue bills in the House. And I think that we have to start looking at the more tax equity issues. We have to think about the revenue bill we passed, which would have provided more revenue for education over the long term. But we also already built in some money prior to the bill even passing that would help us get through the first few years. So it's a ramp up, right? The bill ramps up in terms of the money that's needed each year. And so we have the money to do it if we want to prioritize our kids and their futures and the future of our state economy.
I Googled this old quote, and I said, show me your budget, I'll tell you your value. And it turns out it's a Joe Biden quote. Don't tell me what you value. Show me your budget, and I'll tell you what you value, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Speaking of that, our guest has created Women for Biden in the state of Maryland, I think. Is that correct, Brooke?
Yeah. So it's been great. I've been working with Barbara Goldberg-Goldman in Montgomery County and Aisha Braveboy in Prince George's County. And we worked with the campaign to launch our own chapter of Maryland Women for Biden. We have some awesome honorary co-chairs like Yvette Lewis and Speaker Jones and President Pro Tem Melanie Griffith and County Exec Angela Alsobrooks and Jan Gardner. But we are doing some great work. We have 3,500 members on Facebook, over 1,000 members who have signed up with their email addresses. We have local chapters around the state now. We're doing phone banking every week, and we're preparing to get out the vote in Pennsylvania and North Carolina or wherever the campaign needs us. So we are doing a lot of work. It's been really exciting to see people who are really pumped up to make sure that we get a new president.
Well, of all the disgusting things that the MAGAs do, the repression of voting is the most disgusting of all for me.
Horrible.
So,
horrible.
And this is certainly the right season to be on the recruitment trail to say, register, we need to find you, vote by mail, make sure you're by your mailbox. I mean, the voting by mail part of this, and I'm 52, Brooke, it's been a much more pleasant experience, but on the backside, as Don pointed out, and I'm sure over in the first, as we pointed out a few weeks ago, we're not even counting the votes right. And I, as a citizen, I don't have a whole lot of confidence in that. I have more confidence in Putin's ability to screw with it than I do our confidence to actually make me confident about it.
Right. Well, I think that, yes, it was not handled nearly as well as it should have been or could have been by the State Board of Elections. But voting by mail, really, there's no, in all the studies they have done, or that have been done in all the states that already do vote by mail, there's great things about it, right? Increase of percentage, because you're lowering the barrier to vote. If you work a full-time job and you don't get election day off, maybe you didn't get any of the days off to do early voting, right? You couldn't go. And so there's such a minuscule amount of fraud. I mean, I haven't actually read of any fraud.
Zero. I think it's zero. Pretty much zero.
Yeah. I think, what did I read? I said, read over the past 20 years, there are more than 250 million ballots that have been cast by mail nationwide, and there have been 143 criminal convictions for election fraud related to mail ballots. 250 million, 143. So, right, it's a ridiculous argument. It's such a red herring. Yeah. But the state board didn't do a good job, and we need to make sure that in the next election, things are done in a much better and a much more transparent way.
Well, I love the red herring because I know you went to Dartmouth, so that's great,
Yeah.
Well, why you mentioned Dartmouth. I do have a question before we get to other serious issues. Brooke, is the Dartmouth mascot really Keggy the Keg?
No.
Is it really Keggy the Keg?
So
what is the Keggy the Keg thing?
No, that started after I graduated, thankfully. But there is no official. I don't think there is an official mascot at Dartmouth. We are just the Big Green. So
the Big Green. So Keggy the Keg is just a myth.
No. My wife is from Manchester, New Hampshire, and we have this debate all the time because she went to the high school where they're the Little Green. So, and I give her such a hard time. I said the Little Green. That was their nickname.
That's funny. Well, this is relevant to some current discussions. For many years, the mascot was the Dartmouth Indians. And I think that was unofficial, but it was used a lot. And eventually they eradicated that. And they said, this is incredibly derogatory, and we are not going to allow this anymore at games. And so by the time I got there, it was I didn't see it.
Wow.
It wasn't used, because Dartmouth actually was founded as a school to educate American Indians. And so I'm very, it was good. They acted early to eradicate the Indian symbol.
Well, I'm really worried about you because you went to Walt Whitman and you're Montgomery. You give me all this. I love the Orioles. I have a feeling that the burgundy and gold may be in your background. That maybe more of that. Am I wrong?
The Washington football team was in my background. I did grow up a fan of the Washington football team, but I have since converted. Dan Snyder made it easy to convert.
That was an easy choice, right? Dan Snyder. Steve Bisciotti. That was pretty easy.
Peter Angelos has made me convert to not watching, which is amazing given my last name's Aparicio.
We have the best baseball stadium in America. We play this land in Norland every Friday night.
You better talk to Uncle Larry about getting a lease done, Brooke.
Ignore him, Brooke. You mentioned the whole discussion over mascots and names, and we get into statues and the president's reprehensible decision. I mean, I just read an article this morning where in a recent internal meeting, the president had decided, and you see it in his actions recently, that his problem was that he had not been racist enough, and he told his aides that he was going to reject any attempt to moderate that, and he was actually going to be more racist, and it explained some of his recent behavior, which is horrific. Having said that, and again, I think all the monuments that reflect, the Confederacy, and that they need to come down, and the Confederate flag. At the same time, images like the one recently where a group of people yanked a Columbus statue down and threw it into the harbor, that makes me uneasy as well, thinking that there ought to be a process. I'm wondering what your thought is in terms of how we ought to go about, in a systemic way, taking a look at what monuments need to come down and where they need to go.
Yeah, I think, that's an important question. I think Confederates, just need to come down, period. And I was glad that, she had a lot of failings, but I was glad that Mayor Pugh just took them down one night.
Right.
I think that when the Columbus statue coming down, I think that represented sort of a failure of government to convene people earlier to talk about a process, right? By the time that happened, it was too late, right? We need to be getting out in front of these and examining each and every one and setting up an inclusive process to examine, if this isn't a statue that represents who we who we are and who we aspire to be, then it should come down. Where should it go? Who should it be given to? In a way that people, because we want to make sure that our statues reflect the best of us and who we are and who we want our kids to learn about, right, when they see. But we also, at the same time, I get a little frustrated when we spend sometimes too many articles or too many stories on symbols, which are important, and we have to talk about them, but we also have to have front page stories and big pictures about the Kirwan bill and the housing crisis and healthcare, and so it's
well, that's the bigger picture. We've
yeah.
just taken up 90 seconds of oxygen on a statue, and
Right.
there are 1,000 other things that, to me, that are far more important, like going back to people getting kicked out of their houses from 20 minutes ago, right? Like literally,
Right.
Well,
and
Brooke,
people wearing masks or making that
you've alluded-
debatable,
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've alluded several times, and Nestor and I have talked about it a number of times, is the thing that doesn't get talked about enough in this country, seems to me, is real access to affordable housing for working class folks. And I know that's something that you really care about.
Yeah. I mean, it's been, this has been devastating on working class people and, certainly on people of color and our Latino residents. And, it's a real luxury to be able to work from home during this pandemic, right? To have internet, to have a job where you can be safe and be at home. You're not a farm worker. You're not a transit driver. You're not a grocery store clerk. You're not working at Amazon. You're not working in a poultry plant. We're lucky, right? And, I think that one of the things that we have to do when we emerge from this is to keep stopping ourselves from saying, let's rebuild, right? We have to keep saying, no, let's build better, right? Like, let's have a more equitable tax system. Let's have a more equitable housing system. Let's try to build a society that is much more resilient, that provides opportunity for everybody, especially people of color who have been categorically left out over decades, so that we can build more equitable, prosperous neighborhoods around the state.
Well, this has been a heck of a visit. I hope next time we get together, it's with a G&A Coney Island hot dog and maybe an Icy Delight, over in Highlandtown.
Rooting for the Orioles.
Well, that's probably not going to happen. You got to wait for next year for that now, right?
Yeah. Yes, next year.
One quick question, Nestor, for Brooke, before we let her go and you wrap up. Brooke, we always worry, and Nestor worries as a city resident, that we need state officials who have a real understanding of Baltimore. And that inevitably leads to a discussion of who might be able to serve the state in another capacity in some form. And when I get around and talk to my friends in government, your name inevitably comes up as someone who might be really helpful to the city on a bigger stage. As you look down the road, how do you begin to sort of make those decisions for yourself, and how do you begin to look at other opportunities?
Sure. I mean, I think it's really important to always make sure you're doing the best job that you can in whatever job you're in, first and foremost, right? And that's what I try to do each and every day, is to be a great public servant for the people of District 46 and Baltimore and, as a state delegate at the state level for Marylanders. But, I think when I look around, I am always looking at, do I have more to give? And is there some way that I could be more helpful to more people? And, I keep my eyes open. Right now, I'm really focused on the November election and making sure we can do everything we can to defeat Donald Trump. And, but, I'll keep thinking about it and talking to other folks to see if there are ways that I can be helpful in, not rebuilding, but in building a better Maryland that's more equitable and more resilience for all Marylanders.
Well, you're going to get my full support on the Buy Don campaign as well as the Joe Biden campaign between now and November. So we appreciate your work, and as our representative, I do appreciate the time and coming on. And we will get together. We will hopefully watch some baseball together, hopefully watch some football together before all this is over with, and get out of this pandemic together. But it's been a long time we've been trying to get you on. I'm sorry it wasn't over a crab cake maybe at Fadley's or some shrimp and grits out at State Fair, but it was a great visit, Brooke. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate you all. Thanks for all you do. Don, thanks for all your amazing work and service over the years. And Nestor, thank you for continuing to bring some Baltimore positive thoughts to our airwaves.
Brooke Lierman, she is in District 46, my district here as the Maryland House of Delegates. Don Moeller and I doing Baltimore Positive, moving around town, lots of different conversations, even having some Republicans on this week by request, as Michael Steele is going to be joining us to talk about all sorts of issues, both local and national. Go back into the audio vault, go back into Baltimore Positive. Make sure you're checking out all of our stuff. We did a very important piece with one of our friends and sponsors, Amy Hahn at Fadley's, about crab cakes and where crab meat comes from this time of the year. Make sure you're checking that out. Lots and lots of episodes, all of them sponsored by our great friends at Taharka Ice Cream. I'm holding up the vanilla bean, the sweet vanilla cream ice cream with flecks of vanilla beans. It is tasty, and it's made with love right here in Baltimore, Maryland. Taharka sponsoring us here at Baltimore Positive. I'm also wearing my Royal Farms Chicken Palooza shirt to give a little love for the summer and Chicken Palooza in July as well. Moeller and Gary Realty, they are selling homes over there. Jeff Moeller's going to come on and do some sports. The minute we get baseball back together here, we go up to Fenway Park and play in a couple weeks. I'm going to grab Jeff Moeller. We're going to do a little baseball, a little football, and a little real estate conversation. You can find them at Moeller and Gary Realty. And you could always find me at State Fair, but apparently in 2 weeks you're going to find me across the street at El Guapo working a tamale and a pupusa with my dear friend Evan Brown down from Poutine. I'm doing Canadian dishes. I'm doing chicken and waffles and shrimp and grits. I'm all over the map out there at State Fair. You can find them and order and stop by. You don't have to do curbside. You can actually go inside but outside the tent at State Fair in the 21228. On behalf of former Baltimore County Executive Don Moeller, I am Nestor Aparicio. We are WNST.net, AM 1570. Calm, cool as we can be here in July, and Baltimore Positive.